What would you do if an HOA president kicked down your cabin door, right in front of the state attorney general? I thought I was just protecting my family's lake, until the HOA forged a map and stormed into my cabin right in front of the state attorney general. From bogus fines to midnight sabotage, they had no idea I was holding the evidence that could collapse their entire scheme. And then, Karen went live and filmed herself blowing up her own empire. The first sign something was wrong isn't the sound. It was the firelight. 1 second, the flames in the stone fireplace burned slow and steady, washing the cabin walls in soft orange. The next, they jumped hard, shadows snapping across the knotty pine like the whole room had flinched. Then the front door broke. A crack like a rifle shot tore through the quiet, followed by the splintering scream of wood. The heavy ranch door slammed inward, one hinge ripping loose. Cold mountain air rushed in, bringing dust, exhaust, and the sharp click of heels on the porch boards. Remy Cole was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. The chair scraped back, bumping the side table and rattling his coffee cup. A heartbeat ago he'd been staring into the fire, listening to the wind outside. Now 3 figures filled the doorway. A woman in a blinding pink suit stepped over the shattered threshold like it was nothing. "Remington Cole!" she snapped, voice high and hard enough to cut through the crackle of the logs. "You are in serious violation of Silver Ridge community regulations." Behind her, 2 uniformed deputies stood shoulder to shoulder, boots planted wide, hands near their belts. Their cruiser headlights washed over the gravel outside, catching the edge of the weathered Cole ranch, private land sign swinging on its chains. Remy's shoulders tightened. The name came a beat later. Bethany Reed, president of the Silver Ridge Resort Community Homeowners Association. The same woman who'd once tried to tell him what color his barn roof should be, now standing in his living room like she owned the deed nailed above his fireplace. Her face was flushed, eyes bright with anger. Her perfume, a sharp floral that didn't belong anywhere near pine or smoke, fought with the smells of burning wood and old leather. "You can't just kick in my door," Remy said. "I can and I have," Bethany shot back, jabbing a manicured finger at his chest. "You've ignored notices, refused access, and continued unauthorized activity on regulated shoreline property. This ends tonight." Regulated shoreline. Remy almost laughed. Instead, he glanced past her toward the woman sitting by the fire. Sarah Mitchell still hadn't moved. She sat in the old armchair beside the hearth, legs crossed, hands folded. Her dark suit looked out of place against log walls, but the way she held herself said courtrooms and state buildings more than cabins and lakes. Firelight picked out the faint silver at her temples and the state seal on the folder on the table next to her. She met Remy's eye for a second. The tiniest shake of her head said, "Not yet." Bethany still hadn't noticed her. "This is my ranch," Remy said, turning back to the woman in pink. "This is my cabin. You don't have any right to be here." "The lake outside that window," Bethany snapped, jerking her chin toward the dark glass, "is part of Silver Ridge community property. It's on the association map. The board voted. That gives us jurisdiction over any structures or gatherings within the lakeside zone." "The only map that matters," Remy said, "is the one at the county recorder's office. And that one says every fence post, tree, and drop of water inside that gate is Cole land. Has been since before you put your stone entrance in." One deputy's gaze flicked up to the deed above the mantel. Yellowed paper, old oak frame. The other stared at the floor. Bethany took another step forward, heels ticking on the boards. "You think waving some dusty paper makes you untouchable?" she said. "You've poisoned buyers against this community, blocked improvements, refused to keep your shoreline in compliance. You've been warned. You left us no choice but to escalate. That shoreline you keep talking about is my irrigation reservoir," Remy said. "I designed that dam. I built that spillway. I paid for those rights. You don't get to vote my water into your brochure." Her gaze dropped to the low table between him and the fire. Survey maps, photocopies, and a worn leather folder lay open, a page stamped with an official seal catching the flicker of the flames. "What is that?" she demanded. "Those look like confidential association documents. How did you even—" "They're not yours," Remy cut in. "They're mine, and the state's, and they're why you should have knocked instead of kicking." Something flickered behind her anger. Worry, quickly buried. Wind gusted outside, swinging the front gate so its hinges squealed. Down by the dam, ice shifted with a low crack. The cabin felt smaller, crowded with uniforms and accusation. Bethany turned to the deputies. "Officers, you're witnesses. Mr. Cole has admitted he's conspiring to obstruct lawful HOA governance. He has refused mandated access. I need him removed so the association can secure this structure and any records related to community assets." The older deputy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this is his residence," he said carefully. "We don't have a warrant." "You have my authority as president," Bethany snapped. "This cabin sits on the shared lake. That makes it—" "Ms. Reed." The quiet voice from the armchair slid into the space between her words. Bethany stopped and turned as if seeing the other woman for the first time. Sarah Mitchell rose with unhurried precision. She reached inside her blazer, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and flipped it open. Firelight glinted off the badge tucked behind clear plastic. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said, tone even. "State Attorney General." The title hit the room like a second door breaking. The deputies straightened. The younger one's eyes went wide, darting from the badge to Bethany. Bethany's mouth opened and closed without sound. "What are you doing here?" she managed. "Reviewing Mr. Cole's concerns," Sarah replied, "and the documentation he's provided regarding alleged fraud, abuse of authority, and unlawful manipulation of property boundaries involving the Silver Ridge Resort Community Homeowners Association." Bethany's phone was still in her hand, camera pointed somewhere between Remy and the table. The live stream icon glowed in the corner of the screen, viewer count climbing. Outside, through the broken doorway, headlights crested the rise at the end of the long ranch road. Another vehicle turned up the lane, tires hissing over the cattle guard. Sarah let her gaze move from the shattered door back to Bethany. "You have just forced entry into a private residence without consent," she said. "You've done so in the presence of a state official and while interfering with an ongoing investigation. And conveniently, you appear to be broadcasting your actions live." Bethany swallowed. "This is community business," she said, but the edge was gone. "You have the right," Sarah said, "to remain silent. I would strongly advise you to use it from this point forward." Silence settled. The fire popped. Paper on the table fluttered in the draft, the state seal winking up at all of them. Bethany's hand trembled around her phone. The deputies shifted, suddenly less sure whose side they were on. She pointed at Remy one more time, voice barely above a whisper now. "You're done." From down the road, growing louder, came the sound of more engines approaching the ranch. She pointed at Remy one more time, voice barely above a whisper now. "You're done." From down the road, growing louder, came the sound of more engines approaching the ranch. But the story didn't begin with broken doors or bright pink suits or the echo of state vehicles rolling up a dirt driveway. Before all of that, before citations, boundary wars, and late-night sabotage, there was just the lake, and the land, and a man who wanted nothing more than a quiet place to live out the years he felt he'd already earned. 6 months earlier, the only sound on a morning like this would have been the wind gliding through the tall Wyoming grass. The cabin porch creaked softly under Remy's boots as he stepped out into the early sun, coffee steaming in the crisp mountain air. The lake below lay still as glass, catching the pale orange sky, reflecting his weathered A-frame cabin, the old cedar dock, and the dam he'd built with his own hands. He ran a thumb over the railing, feeling the grooves his father carved decades ago. "Keep it simple, son," the old man used to say. "Let the land talk first." Out here, a man could hear the land clearly. The distant hum of the spillway, the low splash of a trout breaking the surface, the soft metallic ping of the gate chain swinging in the morning breeze. Most folks didn't know that Remy Cole had spent 20 years designing flood control systems and spillway structures across the western states. He'd walked riverbeds the public never saw, studied the way mountain water behaved when snowmelt hit too early or too fast. When he retired, he bought this ranch because it had something rare: its own self-fed lake, fed by a tributary no developer had an eye on back then. The spillway, sturdy concrete, hand-poured, calculated to an angle that wouldn't overcut the banks, was the thing he was proudest of. "Built like the old days," he would say with a small grin, tapping one of the anchor bolts with his boot heel. No HOA committee, no resort architect, no weekend lake visitor understood how much math, sweat, and quiet stubbornness went into keeping water exactly where you meant it to stay. Then the trucks came. First a survey crew rolling in with their white helmets and GPS rods, then bulldozers, then the sound of metal posts hitting earth, marking the edges of something no one had warned him about. At the far end of the valley, beyond the ridge, signs sprang up like weeds: Silver Ridge Resort Community, a new standard of luxury. Lakeside living. He remembered the first time he drove past the entrance they blasted into the hillside. The gate alone looked like it cost more than his barn. Polished stone pillars, timed lighting, imported pine trees planted in military rows. A woman in yoga pants was directing landscapers as if she owned the mountain itself. A week later came the glossy mailer: "Welcome, future neighbor. Join us for a vision of modern living." The lake in the brochure was his dock, his shoreline, his dam, photoshopped clean and labeled as shared amenities. He flipped the pamphlet over, checking for the mistake. There wasn't one. Developers always stretched a little, he figured, but this was bold even for them. The knock came the next afternoon. A silver SUV crunched up the gravel road, stopping right at his gate. The woman who stepped out wore a blazer that looked too expensive for dust and pine needles. Bright blonde hair, perfect smile, a binder tucked under her arm. "Hello," she'd chirped. "I'm Bethany Reed, president of the Silver Ridge Resort Community HOA." He hadn't forgotten that moment, the way she had looked past him, past the handmade gate, past the land, like she was measuring things in her mind for future renovation. "You're outside our current boundaries," she explained, tapping the binder. "But we expect to expand lakeside regulations soon. You might start receiving notices by mail." "Notices for what?" he asked. "For your shoreline," she said, gesturing toward the water. "Your structures, your livestock proximity to the reservoir." He remembered laughing, quiet, disbelieving. "This isn't your reservoir," he told her. "It's a private lake. Been that way for 60 years. Bethany's smile didn't waver. "We'll see what the maps say." He didn't know then what she had meant. Not really. But 2 weeks later, a courier arrived with a rolled survey map, stamped with the developer's logo. It was clean, official-looking, full of colored lines and bold labels. Except one line was wrong. Very wrong. A boundary ran straight through the middle of Remy's lake, cutting across the basin and wrapping around a portion of his dock. Above it, in neat typing, "Adjusted Community Lake Perimeter." Finalized. He spread it across the dining table that night, lantern burning low as he traced the edges of the map with his finger. The document wasn't signed. No seal, no county validation. Just a crisp, confident lie in cartographic form. And yet, he felt the threat. Not loud, not open, but there, in the lines. He circled the disputed section with a pencil and leaned back. The room felt colder, even with the fire going. His father's voice came back to him clear as day. If someone's drawing lines across your water, son, they want more than your view. A coyote howled somewhere beyond the ridge, long and low. The lantern flickered. Remy set the map down, but the panic didn't go away. It sat in the cabin with him like a fourth chair. Something unwelcome. Something that knew where this road was headed. He didn't know how far Silver Ridge was willing to push. He didn't know what Bethany Reed and her board had planned. He didn't know they had already pushed 2 elderly ranch families out with fines they couldn't fight. All he knew was the pencil in his hand felt heavier than it should, and the outline he'd drawn around that impossible boundary would become the first mark in a long, hard battle. Outside the window, the lake was still calm, unaware, untouched. For now. The peace lasted exactly 8 days. It was a Tuesday morning when Remy heard the crunch of tires on his gravel road. An unfamiliar weight. Too smooth to be a ranch truck. Too tentative to be someone local. The sun was barely above the ridge, spilling pale light over the pasture as a convoy of polished SUVs crept up toward his gate. The dust they kicked up hung in the air like a warning. He stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, the wood groaning under his boots. The breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and early thaw. Beyond the fence, a woman in a bright blazer, pink again, though a different shade, stepped out with a clipboard held like a weapon. Bethany Reed. Of course. She strutted toward the gate, heels tapping on the gravel like she expected it to move aside for her. Behind her, 2 younger women carried binders, phones, measuring tapes, a whole mobile HOA enforcement unit. She didn't greet him, didn't ask permission, just slapped a laminated citation onto the wooden post of his gate. "Mr. Cole," she said, projecting her voice like she was performing for a crowd that didn't exist. "Silver Ridge HOA is issuing a formal notice of shoreline noncompliance." Remy stared at her. Shoreline of what? She smiled, a rehearsed, sugary smile that never reached her eyes. "The community lake, of course." His jaw clenched. "That's not your lake." "That's what you claim," she said, "but our updated maps show otherwise." She turned and snapped her fingers. One of her assistants hustled over and handed her a tablet. Bethany held it up as though presenting a sacred document. A digital map, clean lines, bright colors, and the same fraudulent boundary cutting into his water. "You'll need to remove that dock," she said. "It doesn't meet resort standards." "That dock has been there since the late 70s, Remy replied. "Built by my father, on our land, with our timber." Bethany scribbled something onto her clipboard, as if his words were a minor inconvenience. "You also have livestock, goats, I believe, within prohibited distance of the water line. Contamination concerns." "They've grazed that pasture for 30 years, Remy said. "Never contaminated a thing except the occasional pair of work boots." Bethany ignored him. "You'll receive additional notices in the mail." And she turned back toward her SUV. For a moment, all Remy could do was stand there as the convoy rolled away, dust swirling behind them. A warm breeze brushed his cheek, but the morning no longer felt peaceful. Something cold settled in the pit of his stomach. On Friday, the second notice came. Unauthorized dock structure. Fine, $900. Deadline, immediate. The envelope was stuffed into his mailbox so aggressively it bent the metal. He tossed it on the kitchen table next to the map from the developer. The edges of both documents touched, and something about that made his skin crawl the following Tuesday. Again. Tuesday, as if they wanted to make it ritualistic. Another SUV arrived. This time, Bethany didn't even step out. She simply rolled her window down and waved for one of her assistants to hang a new citation on the gate. Livestock interference with community water resource. Fine. $1,200. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or slam the door. Instead, he walked down to the gate, pulled the notice free, and crumpled it in his fist. The wind caught one corner of the paper, tugging it slightly. It made a brittle sound, like something about to snap. The neighbors began talking too. Old Mrs. Turner, who lived off the ridge, stopped by during a supply run. Her hands shook as she clutched a paper bag of feed. "They got the Petersons to sell," she whispered. "3 generations on that land, and they sold for half its worth. Couldn't keep up with the citations. Same thing happened to the Caldwells last spring." Remy felt the blood drain from his face. "You're saying they're doing this on purpose?" Mrs. Turner nodded. "Land flips. Developers buy it up cheap and add it to the resort footprint." Later that week, Remy found a group of strangers walking along his shoreline, dressed in bright jackets, taking photos, pointing at his dock. They said they were evaluating potential community improvements. They said it so casually, as if the lake had always belonged to them. He escorted them off his property and spent the rest of the evening pacing the length of the cabin. The fire burned low, shadows dancing on the walls like restless spirits. Every breath he took tasted like frustration. And then came the letter. A thick envelope with an embossed Silver Ridge logo. Folded inside was a notice so ridiculous he read it 3 times to be sure it wasn't a joke. Water Misuse Penalty Violation Code, SR 478B. Fine, $4,800. Failure to comply may result in a lien placed on your property. A lien on his ranch for using water from a lake he owned. The paper shook in his hand. He set it down slowly on the table, the same table where he'd traced that boundary line 2 weeks earlier. The same table where he'd drunk his morning coffee for years without ever imagining any of this could happen. Outside, the lake remained still, catching the late light. A line of geese flew low over the water, their wings beating a steady rhythm. The peace of it, the simplicity hurt to look at now. He folded the letter, slipped it back into its envelope, and leaned against the window frame. His breath fogged the glass. Something was coming, something big. And he didn't know yet how deep the roots of it went, but he could feel them, crawling toward him, trying to claim what wasn't theirs. The next morning the wind came in early, cold, sharp, pushing dust off the ridge in long gray sheets. It rattled the tin siding on the barn and carried the metallic echo of the cattle guard all the way up to the porch. Remy stood at the edge of his driveway, arms folded, a thick envelope tucked under one elbow like a splinter he couldn't ignore anymore. He'd hardly slept. The lake kept him awake, rolling quietly under the moonlight, as if waiting for something, or warning him. By sunrise, he'd made up his mind. He grabbed the old deed folder, scuffed leather, corners frayed, his father's handwriting still visible on the tag, and tossed it into the passenger seat of his truck. The envelope from the HOA sat beside it, the fine amount stamped bold enough to see even in the dim light. He started the engine. The rumble settled into his bones. Then he turned toward the county courthouse. The drive into town took nearly an hour, the gravel giving way to cracked asphalt, then to the faded blacktop that wound through cottonwood stands and past shuttered feed stores. Dust plumed behind him like a wake. By the time he reached the courthouse, an old red brick building with white columns and a flag that slapped against its pole in the wind, the sky had gone a flat winter blue. Inside, the air smelled of paper, floor wax, and the faint mountain cold that crept through old buildings no matter how many heaters they ran. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead as he stepped into the records office. "Morning, Remy," said a voice behind the counter. Betty Crawford. She'd been here since before he was born. Wiry gray hair pulled into a bun, glasses hanging from a chain, hands that could find any document in the county within 10 minutes. "You look like a man carrying too much," she said, eyeing the stack of envelopes in his hand. He set the deed folder on the counter. "Betty, I need the original plats for my property and anything showing boundary shifts in the last decade." She arched a brow. That HOA fuss getting worse? Worse, he said. And I think they're filing things they shouldn't. She clucked her tongue, opened a drawer, and began flipping through yellowed index cards. Developers been running wild these days. Folks from downstate think they can redline a mountain and call it progress. A moment later, she pulled a folder free. Here we go. Coal Ranch, Water Rights, Lake Basin Survey, 1962 through present. She tapped it. Your dad always kept these spotless. Remy opened the folder at the counter. The old map crackled, creases worn from decades of folding and unfolding. The Lake Basin outline was clear, bold, drawn long before Silver Ridge even existed. It extended not just to the waterline but 50 yards beyond, covering every rock, reed, and inch of shoreline. His father's notes ran down the side. Basin secured, rights protected. Do not let anyone redraw this. He swallowed. Betty, he said quietly, can you check if the HOA filed anything changing these lines? She grimaced. Give me a second. She disappeared into the back office, leaving Remy alone with the hum of lights and the thumping of an old radiator. Dust danced through a shaft of sunlight slanting across the counter. Then Betty returned with a thin manila folder, too thin. Here, she said, sliding it toward him. He opened it. 2 pages, both printed cleanly, both stamped with the Silver Ridge logo. Updated boundary proposal, community lake integration, supplemental map, no signatures, no county seal, no approval from any department, just a map extending HOA territory over his lake. That's not legal, Remy said. Not even close, Betty replied, and whoever filed it didn't follow the process. No validation, no review. It's not recorded properly. If they're using this to push you around, they're bluffing. He exhaled, half relief, half something darker. Betty, can I get certified copies of all this? He asked. She nodded. Of course. Give me a few minutes. While she worked, he looked back through the documents, remembering the last time his father brought these maps home. He'd been a boy, legs dangling from a kitchen chair, watching as his father traced the lake's outline with a calloused finger. These lines are your future, Rem, he had said. Anybody tries to change them, you stand your ground. When Betty returned, she handed him a thick packet, stamped, dated, official. He tucked it under his arm like armor. As he walked back to his truck, the wind hit harder, sweeping down from the ridge. He paused, looking across town, where the mountains rose like old guardians. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A low voice, distorted, mechanical almost, spoke into his ear. You should stop digging, Mr. Cole. The wind swallowed the silence that followed. Remy gripped the phone tighter. Who is this? He demanded. You know who, the voice said. And you know what to do. Drop it. Walk away. The line went dead. He stood there in the courthouse parking lot, cold breeze whipping his jacket, the warning lodged in his chest like a stone. Someone wanted the lake, wanted the water, wanted the land, and they were willing to lie and threaten to get it. He slipped his phone into his pocket, climbed into his truck, and looked at the packet of documents on the seat beside him. If they wanted him to walk away, they were already scared. That was enough to make him drive home slower than usual, watching every car behind him, every turnoff, every shadow in the road. The lake waited for him, still calm, still quiet. But now he knew the truth. Someone else had their eyes on it, and they weren't planning to stop. By the time Remy pulled into his driveway, the sun was dropping behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across the pasture. The wind had died down, leaving the air uncomfortably still. It was the kind of stillness that made a man feel watched. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The packet of certified documents lay on the passenger seat, its crisp edges catching the last bit of daylight. Proof. Evidence, protection. At least it should have been. But the voicemail still echoed in his head. You should stop digging. He stepped out of the truck and walked toward the cabin. The boards of the porch creaked under his boots, familiar but somehow heavier tonight. As he reached for the door handle, he saw it, tucked neatly between the boards and the frame. Another notice. He pulled it free. This one wasn't mailed. It wasn't posted by the gate. Someone had come right up onto his porch while he was gone. Environmental hazard citation violation. Unpermitted alterations to shoreline fine. $650. Immediate inspection required. He let out a slow breath through his teeth. Alterations? He hadn't moved so much as a rock. A breeze whispered across the lake, brushing the surface with tiny ripples. The smell of damp earth drifted up from the shallows. In any other moment, he would have taken comfort in it. Tonight, it felt like the lake was holding its breath too. He opened the cabin door and stepped inside. The fire was long out, leaving the place cool and dim. He set the citation on the table, next to the thick packet from the courthouse. The contrast was almost laughable. Real documents versus HOA theater props. He was halfway to the kitchen when headlights swept across the front windows. 2 beams. Then another pair. Then a third. Cars. Coming up the driveway. He stepped back onto the porch, squinting through the growing darkness. 3 vehicles parked in a neat line. 1 county truck, 1 SUV with green wildlife decals, and another with a fire marshal emblem on the side. Doors opened. Inspectors climbed out. All of them. Electrical, environmental, fire safety. Even one from wildlife management, clipboard hugged tight to his chest. Remy felt something hot rise in his throat. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordinated. Someone had made calls. "Evening, Mr. Cole," the fire marshal said as he approached. "We got anonymous complaints about unsafe wiring in the cabin." The environmental officer followed. "And unreported changes to shoreline vegetation." The wildlife inspector lifted his clipboard. "Possible habitat disruption involving your goats." "My goats?" Remy said. "They've been chewing grass by that lake since Reagan was in office." All 3 officers stood silent. Their boots crunched on the gravel. The sun was nearly gone, leaving only a faint orange glow on the horizon, reflected in the still water. Remy exhaled sharply. "You boys look like you've been sent on a wild goose chase." The fire marshal shifted uneasily. "We gotta check it out anyway." "Fine," Remy said. "Do your jobs, but don't let whoever called you waste your time again." He led them around the cabin, through the barn, down the slope to the lake. Flashlights flicked across fence posts and dock pilings. Goats bleated from their pen, annoyed by the sudden attention. The sound echoed across the water. After nearly an hour of walking, checking, measuring, and taking notes, the inspectors gathered at the edge of his driveway. "Everything's in order," the environmental officer said. "Actually better than most ranches." "No electrical issues either," added the fire marshal. "Your wiring's clean. Whoever called this in didn't know what they were talking about." The wildlife inspector clicked his pen closed. "Zero habitat impact. Your herd isn't hurting anything." They stood there, 3 men who looked embarrassed to even be on his property. Remy rubbed a hand across his jaw. "You want to know who keeps filing these complaints?" They exchanged glances. No one answered. But they didn't need to. He already knew. The inspectors drove off, tires spitting gravel. Their taillights disappeared into the dark, swallowed by trees and distance. But Remy wasn't alone. Movement at the fence line caught his eye. A silhouette stood by the gate. Straight posture, arms crossed. As the figure stepped closer, the porch light caught a flash of pink fabric. Bethany. She didn't walk all the way up this time. She stayed behind the gate, resting her hands casually on the top rail. "Busy night for you," she called out, voice smooth, almost sweet. "Lots of people concerned about safety around here." He stepped closer. "You called them." She shrugged as if the whole thing were a harmless misunderstanding. "It's my duty as HOA president to respond to community complaints. This is private property." Her smile grew thin. "Not for long, Remington. Once the association finalizes our lake integration plans, your shoreline will fall under our jurisdiction, which means everything you do affects everyone." "That's not how the law works," he said. "No," she agreed. "That's how power works." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night pressed in tight, the lake whispering behind him, the mountain wind brushing past her hair. When she finally turned away, she spoke softly. So softly, he wouldn't have heard if the world hadn't gone dead quiet around them. "Sell now," she murmured, "before this gets ugly." She walked back toward her SUV. The engine started with a purr far too smooth for ranch country. The headlights swept across his boots one more time before she drove off into the dark. Remy stared after her, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. Then a sharp metallic sound cut through the air. He spun toward the dam. The moonlight caught it, a glint of metal out of place. Yves jogged down the slope, boots slipping in the gravel, the cool air stinging his lungs. He reached the spillway and stopped cold. The control valve, the one that regulated the entire lake level, was turned halfway open. Not by accident, not by weather. Someone had put a wrench on it. He closed it quickly, testing the weight. The gear had fresh scuffs, too fresh. A smear of something dark clung to the edge. Oil, grease. Tools had been here. Sabotage. He felt the world tilt, just a hair. His lake, his water, his valley. Attacked. Not by nature or time or the harshness of the mountain seasons. By people. People who wanted him gone. He stood there beside the dam, breath clouding in the moonlight. Fingers still wrapped around the control valve he'd just forced shut. The lake lapped gently at the embankment, innocent on the surface, unaware of how close it had come to breaking loose. If that valve had stayed open overnight, the water level would have dropped just enough to flood parts of the lower pasture, and if the pressure shifted wrong, the spillway itself could have cracked. He stared at the fresh scuff marks on the metal. Someone had used a wrench, a large one, and they'd known exactly what they were doing. The cut was clean, deliberate, not a prank, not vandalism. Strategy. The mountain air turned colder, settling into his bones as he walked back up the slope. Each step felt heavier than the one before. The wind, which usually carried the soft murmur of the lake, now moved like a warning across the field. Inside the cabin, he dropped into the old chair by the fire pit. The hearth was cold, but he didn't bother lighting it. He just sat, listening. The cabin creaked the way old places do when the temperature drops. Outside, a lone coyote called out from the ridge, long and mournful. He rubbed his forehead. He wasn't imagining the escalation. It was real and accelerating. The citations had been one thing. Harassment, intimidation, even the parade of inspectors. He could stomach all that. He'd lived through worse on job sites in unforgiving mountain passes. He could handle paperwork and bureaucracy. But sabotage? That changed everything. He was still sitting there, staring at the cold fireplace stones, when he heard the crunch of tires again. For a moment he froze, half expecting another convoy of SUVs, another clipboard brigade marching up his porch steps. But the engine sounded different this time. older, familiar. He stepped outside and saw a pair of headlights climbing the dirt road, flickering across the wooden fence, cutting through the darkness in a steady rhythm. A battered red pickup pulled into the yard. The door opened, and a man climbed out, broad-shouldered, mid-50s, wearing a canvas jacket and the kind of expression only someone who's spent decades dealing with stubborn ranchers and broken machinery could have. "Jake?" Remy said. Jake Mercer shut the truck door with his elbow. "Heard you had a bit of excitement up here." Remy raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Jake snorted. "County grapevine moves quicker than wildfire. Fire marshal told a deputy who told another deputy who told old Larry at the diner. Larry told me. Whole process took 15 minutes. The two men walked toward the cabin. Gravel crunched under their boots. Inside, Jake tossed his hat on the table and crossed his arms. "Start talking." Remy didn't embellish. He didn't need to. Every detail, from the citations to the inspectors to Bethany's warnings to the tampered valve, poured out like water finally breaking through a dam of its own. By the time he finished, Jake's jaw was set tight. "Well," Jake said, "this isn't HOA drama anymore." "I noticed," Remy replied. Jake pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Saw this today." He slid it across the table. It was a notice announcing a rezoning proposal, one that would reclassify several parcels around Silver Ridge as redevelopment corridors. One of the parcels was directly adjacent to Remy's land. "They're planning something big," Jake said. "Bigger than some fancy lakeside resort, and your lake is smack in the middle of it." Remy rubbed his thumb along the edge of the notice. "They want water rights." "Yep." "And shoreline access." "Yep." "And if they get those," Jake said, "they can force every property around here into a redevelopment plan. That's why Bethany's been putting the squeeze on you." A gust of wind rattled the cabin windows, and the smell of snow drifted in, dry, metallic, biting at the air. "Jake," Remy said quietly, "who's behind this?" Jake leaned against the counter. "Bethany's husband works with Mountain Crest Development. They've been buying up land under shell companies. Rumor is the state's been trying to nail them for 2 years. Fraud, kickbacks, forged filings, the whole platter." Remy stiffened. "Think they're using the HOA to do their groundwork?" "Wouldn't be the first time," Jake replied. "HOAs have authority, money, and leverage. Perfect cover, especially if the board president is enthusiastic." The fireless hearth cast deep shadows across the walls, making the cabin feel smaller, more crowded. Remy rubbed his forehead again. "So what do I do?" he asked. Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket again, pulled out a slip of paper, and slid it onto the table. A phone number. "What's this?" Remy asked. "The person who scares people like Bethany," Jake said, "and her husband, and anyone who thinks they can redraw a man's land." He tapped the paper once. "Her name's Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah?" Remy repeated. "State Attorney General," Jake finished, "and she's been looking for someone like you." The room went still again. The cabin seemed to lean in around them, listening. Remy stared at the number, simple black ink on white paper, unassuming, but somehow heavier than the maps stacked beside it. Jake picked up his hat. "This isn't just about your lake anymore. It's about every rancher whose land they're trying to swallow up." He paused at the door. "Call her, Remy, before they try something worse." When Jake left, the night settled back in, quiet and cold. The lake reflected the moonlight through the cabin window, shimmering like a sheet of silver. Remy sat down, picked up the slip of paper, and turned it over in his hand. The edges were warm from Jake's pocket. Familiar somehow, like a tool passed down from a father. He cleared his throat, reached for his phone, and stared at the keypad. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the faint whisper of the dam's spillway, steady and patient. He dialed, The ring sounded too loud in the quiet cabin. 1, 2, 3 times before a firm, professional voice answered. "This is Sarah Mitchell." For a heartbeat, he couldn't speak. It wasn't nerves. It was the strange sense that once he told his story out loud, there'd be no turning back. "Ms. Mitchell," he finally said, "my name is Remy Cole. I think I've got something you need to see." There was a pause. He could almost picture her, pen suspended over a legal pad, eyebrow raised. Then, "I've heard your name before, Mr. Cole, from multiple sources. Are you safe right now?" Remy glanced out the window. The lake glimmered under the moonlight, peaceful in a way that now felt false. For the moment, "Good," she said. "I'll be at your ranch at dawn." She hung up before he could ask how she even knew where he lived. He stood there for a long moment, holding the phone, listening to the wind scratch across the porch boards. Something shifted in the darkness, something in the air he couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It was relief mixed with anticipation, like watching storm clouds form and knowing you finally had someone on your side to weather them. Dawn arrived cold and silver. Remy stepped outside just as the first sliver of sun rose behind the ridge, turning the frost on the grass into glittering shards. The breath from his lungs came out in pale clouds. The day smelled like pine and snow, and the faint metallic scent that always warned of a colder front coming. Then he heard it, a vehicle approaching slowly, deliberately. A dark sedan rolled up the driveway, its tires whispering over the dirt. It didn't look like the shiny resort cars or the county trucks. This one was understated, government issue, with plates that meant business. The door opened and Sarah Mitchell stepped out. She was smaller than he expected, but something in her stance, straight shoulders, stillness, a kind of quiet readiness, made her feel 10 feet tall. She wore a dark suit under a heavy wool coat and carried a leather briefcase tucked close against her side. Her eyes swept across the ranch, taking everything in, the pasture, the barn, the lake glittering behind the cabin. "Mr. Cole," she said, offering her hand. Her grip was steady, professional. "Show me what you have." They went inside. The cabin still held the chill of the early morning, though the fire Remy lit the night before had left a faint warm scent in the air, wood smoke and pine pitch. Sarah took it all in without comment, setting her briefcase on the table beside the deed folder. "Start from the beginning," she said. He spread the documents out, photos of the fraudulent map, copies of the original deeds, certified plats from the courthouse, citations, notices, copies of the anonymous voicemail, transcribed on a sheet of paper. As he talked, Sarah's eyes grew sharper, her jaw tightening just a little. She took notes quickly, page after page, her pen scratching with purpose. When he told her about the sabotage on the control valve, she stopped writing entirely. "Someone tampered with your water infrastructure?" she asked. "Intentionally," Remy said. "Used a wrench on the valve." "That's criminal trespass," she said quietly, "and potentially reckless endangerment." She picked up the fraudulent boundary proposal next, holding it toward the window to catch the morning light. The fake map lines glowed faintly under the reflection. "This," she said, "is a felony if used to influence property sales or regulatory filings." "You mean it's not just unethical," Remy said. "It's illegal." "It's highly illegal," she corrected, "and not isolated." She closed her folder and looked at him fully now. "Mr. Cole, we've been investigating a multi-county land manipulation scheme for 18 months. Several HOAs and developers have been working together to drive down property values, force sales, and funnel money into shell companies. We've been close to identifying the connecting figure, but missing solid evidence." She tapped the forged map. "This is the missing piece." The cabin seemed to shrink around them as the weight of her words settled in. Remy swallowed. And you think Bethany is involved? I think she's more than involved, Sarah said. I think she's instrumental. She moved to the window, arms folded, looking out at the lake. Her breath formed faint mist on the glass as she spoke. I'll need to map everything, she said. Every document, every interaction, every filing, every citation she issued. We're building a case from multiple counties. But yours, your lake, your water rights, may be the keystone we've been missing. Then she turned back with a look he'd recognize later, after everything was over. The look of someone about to pull the thread that unraveled an empire. May I see the dam? She asked. They walked down the slope together. The grass crunched under their boots. The lake reflected the newborn sun, rising like a lantern behind the ridge. Mist drifted off the surface in slow curls. When they reached the spillway, Sarah crouched, tracing the scratches on the valve with her glove. Professionally done, she murmured. Someone knew exactly what to loosen. Why sabotage the lake? Remy asked. She stood again, brushing dust from her gloves. Pressure, she said. Destabilization. Create a problem only they can fix. Force compliance. Or create a narrative that you're mismanaging the water. Remy's hands tightened. They'd risk flooding the pasture? For power, she said simply. Yes. He took a long breath, trying to keep anger from climbing too high too fast. They walked back toward the cabin. On the rise, the sunlight caught the ridge of his barn roof, the weathered boards gleaming a dull gold. Mr. Cole, Sarah said, stopping just short of the porch. I need to know something. What's that? Are you willing to help us bring this entire scheme down? The wind picked up, brushing dust across the porch, rattling the chimes his father hung decades ago. Remy looked past Sarah, toward the lake that had been his sanctuary for most of his life. Yes, he said. I'm ready. Sarah nodded once, sharp, decisive. Then we begin now. They turned toward the cabin, but before they could step inside, a new sound rose through the quiet morning. Engines. Fast. Coming up the road. Not ranch trucks, not county trucks, not Sarah's car. Remy and Sarah both turned as the first SUV appeared over the ridge, barreling toward the house in a spray of dust and gravel. More headlights followed. Too many. Sarah's expression sharpened. That's not my team, she said. The lead SUV skidded to a stop in Remy's driveway, throwing dirt against the porch steps. The air filled with the hum of idling engines and the metallic tick of cooling radiators. The moment the dust settled, a door flew open. Bethany Reed was out before anyone else. A bright pink suit jacket flared behind her like a flag being whipped in the wind. Her heels struck the gravel with clipped, angry steps. One hand held her phone raised high. The red recording light glowed like a warning. "This," she shouted, spinning toward her camera, "is what corruption looks like." Two HOA board members trailed behind her with cheap camcorders and frantic whispers. The last SUV spat out two county deputies, men Remy recognized instantly. Young, nervous, clearly dragged into something they didn't fully understand. Sarah exhaled once, quietly. "Don't engage," she murmured, stepping to Remy's side. "Let her show us exactly who she is." Bethany marched straight toward the porch. "You!" she screamed, pointing at Remy with every ounce of theatrical indignation she could muster. "You think you can hide behind government friends? You think you can block a lawful HOA inspection?" "This isn't an HOA matter," Remy said, voice steady. "This is my ranch." "It's community property," she snapped back. Sarah stepped forward. "Miss Reed, the lake is fully contained within Mr. Cole's deed. You have no jurisdiction." Bethany swept past her, not even looking in her direction. "Get out of my way," she barked. I am recording evidence of ongoing violations. Sarah blinked once, almost amused. Ms. Reed, I just told you. Bethany reached the porch steps, phone still held high. He is conspiring with outside officials to interfere with community governance. This will not stand. Then she was inside, just like that. Before Remy could speak, before Sarah could warn her, the HOA president shoved the cabin door wide open and stormed in, heels crushing the welcome mat, camera waving through the air like a weapon. This man, she shrilled into her live stream, is engaged in illegal meetings with unknown state agents. She trailed off, stopped, completely froze, because Sarah Mitchell had followed her into the cabin. And now, in the dim fire-lit room, the Attorney General of the state stood framed in the doorway, hands clasped calmly in front of her, badge gleaming in the glow of the hearth. Bethany blinked. Once. Twice. Her phone shook. Sarah spoke first. Miss Reed, she said evenly, you have just forced yourself into a private residence. You are interrupting a state investigation, and you are live-streaming your own actions. Bethany's painted lips parted in horror. Her arm wavered. Her live-stream viewers, tiny comments flashing across the screen, suddenly quieted. Even the phone seemed unsure whether to keep recording. I didn't know, Bethany stammered. You didn't ask, Sarah replied. One of the deputies stepped inside behind her, swallowing nervously as he took in the scene. His partner stayed near the porch, shifting uneasily. Ma'am, the younger deputy said quietly to Bethany, maybe we should step outside. No, Bethany snapped, though her voice cracked with panic. I'm documenting misconduct. You're documenting multiple felonies, Sarah corrected gently, including trespassing, harassment, obstruction, and interference with a state inquiry, and based on your entry, possibly property damage. Bethany's gaze whipped toward the broken doorframe she had shoved past. I didn't, he wouldn't let me in. Nobody denied you entry, Sarah said. You never knocked. A long, heavy silence settled over the cabin. The only sound was the light crackle of the fire. Remy watched Bethany's breath quicken. Her eyes darted around the room, toward the maps on the table, the folder of certified deeds, the copies of fraudulent filings, the scratch marks on the dam valve visible through the window. Her voice softened, desperate. You don't understand. I'm the HOA president. I have a duty. You have exceeded it, Sarah said. Repeatedly, aggressively, illegally. Bethany stepped back, phone still raised but trembling now. Her live stream viewers watched in mute disbelief. One deputy cleared his throat. The air in the room changed. Something shifted, like the moment before a still lake erupts into rain. Sarah finally reached into her coat. Ms. Reed, she said, removing her wallet and opening it. Allow me to reintroduce myself. She held up the badge. Every soul in the room leaned slightly closer without meaning to. I'm Sarah Mitchell, she said, State Attorney General for the district. Bethany's knees buckled a little. Her phone dipped. Her mouth dropped open. You, she whispered. You're the Attorney General? Yes, Sarah said. And you have just made one of the most poorly timed entrances I've ever witnessed. Bethany stared at her live stream screen, her shocked face poorly framed, thousands of viewers now watching her meltdown in real time. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel, slow, heavy, coordinated. More vehicles arrived. State troopers. Their silhouettes moved past the windows. Uniforms, lights, purpose. A soft knock came at the shattered doorframe. Madam Attorney General, a trooper called. We're in position. Bethany spun around. Wait, she cried, voice cracking. You can't. This is all a misunderstanding. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Ms. Reed," she said, "you're under investigation. And given what you've shown us today, you've given us everything we need." Bethany's phone slipped from her hand. It hit the wooden floor with a hollow, echoing clatter. Her live stream continued, capturing everything. For one long second, the cabin held its breath. Even the fire seemed to pause, flames frozen mid-flicker as if watching the catastrophe unfold. Then the world around Bethany Reed began to close in. Troopers filled the porch, boots thudding against the old boards. Radios crackled softly. The wind outside kicked up dust and pine needles, swirling them through the broken doorway like nature itself was sweeping her out. The younger deputy, face pale beneath his hat, swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I think you should step back." Bethany didn't move. Her knees locked, hands trembling, eyes fixed on Sarah Mitchell as though she couldn't decide whether to scream or beg. This is harassment," Bethany stammered. "I was protecting community assets. I was doing my duty." "Your duty," Sarah said evenly, "does not include falsifying boundary maps, manipulating property values, intimidating landowners, trespassing, and interfering with a state investigation." I never," Bethany's voice cracked. "Those maps were legitimate. The board approved." "That's interesting," Sarah cut in, "because the county clerk confirmed they weren't signed, weren't verified, and weren't filed legally, which means they weren't just invalid, they were fraudulent." Gasps came from two HOA board members standing behind her. One of them took a half step backward, as if trying to dissolve into the walls. Remy didn't speak. He stood to the side, arms folded, face calm but unreadable. A man who had weathered storms before. And this was just another storm. Except this one didn't belong to the land. It belonged to justice. The senior trooper stepped forward. "Ms. Reed, please place your hands in front of you." Bethany recoiled. No, you can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "That's not a legal immunity," Sarah replied. "And based on your live stream, you've documented a multitude of crimes in real time." The trooper looked almost apologetic as he reached gently for her wrists. "Ma'am." But Bethany jerked back, panic turning her movements frantic. "You don't understand. He's lying. He's been fighting us for months. He forged those papers to make me look bad. I have witnesses." "Actually," Sarah said, "we have 27 residents across 3 counties who reported similar harassment, fraudulent citations, and forced property sales from HOAs connected to your husband's development network." The color drained from Bethany's face. Twist, the final one. "And thanks to Mr. Cole's documentation," Sarah continued, "we now have the thread that ties all of your schemes together." Bethany shook her head violently. "You can't prove anything." "We don't have to prove it here," Sarah replied, calm as stone. "But the burden of proof has shifted, and your live stream," she gestured to the phone still recording on the floor, "just became State's Exhibit A." The comments were still flying across the cracked screen. "What is happening? Is that the AG? This is wild. She's in so much trouble, HOA gone crazy." Lowell, one of the deputies, finally whispered, "Ma'am, it's time." Bethany's legs buckled. The trooper caught her by the elbow as she sagged, then gently locked the cuffs around her wrists. The metal clicked softly, an almost gentle sound that felt like thunder in the tight cabin. "No," Bethany whimpered. "My husband will fix this. He'll make calls. He knows people." Sarah stepped forward, her tone still level. "Your husband is already under review by the State Ethics Board. His influence ends today." Outside, neighbors had begun to gather along the fence line, drawn by the lights, the sirens, the dust. Old Mrs. Turner, the Martinez family, a few quiet ranchers who'd suffered under HOA threats but never dared speak up. They watched in stunned silence as troopers guided Bethany out of the cabin she had stormed into so confidently minutes earlier. Her pink suit looked less like power now, and more like desperation as she stumbled across the porch, heels catching on the splintered threshold she herself had broken. Remy followed her out. Slow steps, hands in his pockets. Dust swirled around his boots. His lake shone behind him like a polished mirror, reflecting the morning sun. It looked calm, calmer than he'd seen it in months. As Bethany was led toward the waiting patrol car, Mrs. Turner whispered, "Lord help her. She thought she owned the whole mountain." One of the HOA board members rushed forward, voice trembling. "We didn't know. She told us the documents were approved. She said Mr. Cole was a threat to the community." Sarah didn't even look at him. "You'll be questioned. Cooperate, and you may avoid charges." Remy glanced at the board member, saw the guilt in his eyes, and nodded once. "Tell the truth," he said. "All of it." Bethany reached the patrol car door and turned, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "This isn't over," she sobbed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Sarah stepped beside Remy on the porch. "Oh, I know exactly who we're dealing with," she said. "A criminal enterprise hiding behind a homeowners association. And you've just provided us with the final piece." She glanced at Remy. "Ready to finish this?" Remy let out a long breath, the kind that a man only exhales when a burden finally lifts, if only slightly. "Yes," he said quietly. "Let's finish it." The patrol car doors shut with a muted thump, and the convoy of state troopers rolled down the dirt road, engines fading into the wide Wyoming valley. Dust hung suspended behind them, glowing gold in the late afternoon sun before slowly settling across the fence posts and sagebrush. For the first time in months, the ranch was quiet again. Not the uneasy quiet of fear or waiting, but a calm silence, thick and real, settling into the earth the way snowfall settles into pine branches. Sarah closed her briefcase and stepped off the porch, boots crunching softly. "We'll take it from here," she said, her voice steady but carrying a warmth that hadn't been there earlier. "Your documentation, your maps, your testimony, they connected pieces we've been chasing for years." Remy nodded. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "we make sure this never happens to another landowner again." She offered her hand, and Remy shook it firmly. Then she walked to her car. Before she climbed inside, she turned back. "Mr. Cole," she said, "take care of your lake. It's strong, but it's needed you to fight for it." And you did. He watched her leave, headlights sweeping across the field before the sedan disappeared behind the ridge. The sky dimmed to soft blues and purples, the lake shimmering like a sheet of glass. 3 months passed. Winter came. Then the early hint of spring. Court hearings followed, swift and decisive. Judge Harrison didn't waste breath. He cited financial fraud, falsified filings, harassment, forced sales, and deliberate endangerment of private infrastructure. Bethany Reed received 3 years in federal custody and a lifetime ban from serving in any HOA or community board. Her husband, caught through a separate but connected investigation, was sentenced to 18 months for conspiracy and misuse of public influence. Mountain Crest Development collapsed under the weight of audits, subpoenas, and whistleblower testimony from other HOA members who finally broke their silence. And Silver Ridge? It dissolved almost overnight. Residents voted unanimously to dismantle the HOA and replace it with the Clearwater Volunteer Association. No fines, no forced regulations, no citations pinned like weapons. Just neighbors repairing trails, cleaning docks, and caring for the land the way folks around here had done long before resort living arrived. Remy didn't attend most of the meetings. He preferred the quiet. But folks dropped by often, sometimes to say thank you, sometimes just to sit by the fire with a mug of coffee, and breathe air that finally felt free. One crisp morning, a thick envelope arrived in his mailbox. It wasn't stamped with county ink or HOA logos. It bore the seal of the state attorney general. Inside was a letter, handwritten in graceful script. Mr. Cole, your evidence aided in the recovery of stolen funds across multiple counties. The state is awarding you whistleblower compensation for the protection of private water and land rights. Use it as you see fit. S. Mitchell. A check was enclosed, more money than he'd expected, enough to repair his dock, reinforce the dam spillway, and replace the old pump house that had survived longer than it had any right to. But Remy didn't touch the money immediately. Instead, he walked outside, down the slope, and across the frost-stiffened grass toward the lake. The water lay calm, dark at the edges, light in the center where the rising sun caught it. Mallards skimmed across the surface, wings cutting gentle ripples that glided toward the shore. He reached his dock, the old cedar boards humming faintly in the morning wind. Some were warped, some cracked along their edges, but they held. They always had. Remy crouched down, dipped his hand into the water, and let the cold bite his skin before pulling it back out. The air smelled like thawing earth and distant pine. The land felt alive again, honest. Later that week, the community held a lakeside gathering. Nothing fancy, just neighbors with folding chairs and thermoses, watching kids skip stones across the shallows. Mrs. Turner sat beside him and nudged his elbow. "You saved this place," she murmured. "We were all too scared to say anything. But you did it." Remy shook his head lightly. "I just told the truth." "Sometimes," she said, voice soft, "that's the bravest thing a man can do." As evening settled, streaks of orange and pink spread across the sky, mirrored perfectly on the water's surface. The lake had a way of taking every color the world could offer and turning it into something softer, something whole. Once the sun dipped low, Remy returned to the cabin, carrying a leather folder under his arm. Inside were every document he had fought for: deeds, plats, water maps, survey notes, his father's writing, his own additions, the entire story of their lake, preserved in ink and paper. He placed the folder on the dock, opened it to the deed his father framed decades ago, and looked out over the lake one more time. The wind brushed across the pages. The water whispered against the shore. "The land remembers who treats it right," he said quietly, closing the folder with a reverence that felt like prayer. And this time, the land answered, not with noise but with peace. If this story hit home for you, drop a simple yes in the comments, or leave a justice if you've ever had to stand your ground against an HOA or anyone who tried to take what was yours. Out here, a man's land and his word still mean something, and stories like this remind us why we fight for both. And if you'd like to ride along for more true grit HOA showdowns and rancher justice tales, feel free to stick around and subscribe. I'd be proud to have you with us.